Hey, Travels with Dottie here. Here we are at the Billy the Kid Museum in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And I don't have all that much to say as I walk through here, so that's why I'm doing the after the fact narration. Um, as I got here and I went through the museum and I was around town, and you'll see later I'll go to the gravesite. I started doing more research into the legend of Billy the Kid. And I had, previous to this, just done a cursory examination of information about Billy the Kid. There's Lucian Maxwell, largest landowner in the United States, purchased the buildings of the old fort in 1870 for $5,000. So after that cursory examination of the information, I had thought Billy the Kid was just a stone cold killer without a conscience. And as I got here, I found a very different perspective. Well, actually, many perspectives, but the information I took in and doing research online and talking to people that live here that have ancestral connections to people that were actually here when things happened, I have a much different idea about who this guy Billy the Kid was, and it's much more positive. Now, I don't think there's any doubt that this young man was pretty quick to shoot. There's no doubt about that. But on the continuum of reasons for doing that kind of harm, he leans more towards reasons that are understandable and are tied to a sense of loyalty and ethics. I no longer think Billy the Kid was an opportunistic criminal, but certainly by legal definitions, he was a criminal. But he was much beloved in the New Mexico territory. He apparently had a very infectious, positive personality.
This is something you wouldn't expect to see in an outlaw museum.
Wait, hang on, if that was his rifle, then he ate top.
Look,
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot to see. Okay, so this is the one.
So this is actually Billy the Kid's rifle right there. And it's a 44 caliber 1873 Winchester. Billy the Kid gave this rifle to Celadon Trujillo 2 months before Billy was shot by Pat Garrett in the bedroom of Pete Maxwell on July 14th, 1881. This may or may not be Billy the Kid's gun belt sidearm. It says it's undocumented. Lots of old, probably very valuable weapons in here. This one's a recreation of Billy the Kid's holster for a Colt single-action army pistol, which is apparently what he used. A thing that I don't see in dispute anywhere is that Billy the Kid was a extraordinary marksman, both with a pistol and with a rifle. This museum is quite extensive, and it was evident right off the bat that not everything in this museum, or even the majority of the things in this museum, are directly related to Billy the Kid. They're definitely related to that period of time in this area from the late 19th to early 20th century. And I went through here pretty quickly. You could go if you're interested in these kind of artifacts from that era. You can spend a long time in this museum, and it's quite a treat. Uh, I got the senior discount, so it was $4 instead of $5. But talk about worth it, $4. I could do that all day long to see amazing artifacts like this.
It is so unexpected. He's got no chances of getting out of this. And suddenly, whip, whap, bang, they're dead. And dead very, how shall I say, spectacularly. And he then comes out commandeers.
Since there were no signs telling me not to, I put my hands on a couple of these saddles, just trying to think about when they were used and who rode in them. This isn't, Hollywood props. These are the real thing. That's a child's cactus. A child's casket made in the early 1900s. Coffee grinders, it looks like. Born in Hell's Kitchen in New York City. The rest of this mural really tells Billy the Kid's life story.
After midnight. Pals, Tom. Follow the arrows.
That was a hearse wagon, but all these wagons are obviously authentic period pieces. This was modern transportation in Billy the Kid's day. So this is a recreation of Billy the Kid's grave. We're going to the real site after this. This is a recreation of it. He was buried with 2 friends, so there are 3 of them together. And this is an old jail relocated from somewhere else, not directly related to Billy, but it gives you an idea of what a jail cell might have looked like, or did look like back in those days. When you first walk into this museum, you think it's kind of small until you look around and you follow arrows and directions, and what? Then we have an auto museum. Now, these things were not around when Billy the Kid walked this earth, but shortly afterwards, the next century, these were replacing the horses. I always like to see old cars. Cool. (1930) Model A Ford Coupe with rumble seat. Beautiful. I was trying to figure out what kind of motorcycle that was. I was guessing an Indian, but I didn't see anything that said what it was. So there are probably those out there watching this that knows exactly what that is. But put it in the comments for me if you know. Well, I've moved on and I've driven the few miles to the Billy the Kid gravesite. And this is right next to the property that once held the Fort Sumner. Well, this is it. And I'll read you what the sign says here. Billy the Kid's elusive tombstone. Billy the Kid's tombstone was stolen in 1951. Its location was a mystery for 26 years until 1976, when it was recovered in Granbury, Texas by Joe Bolin. The tombstone was stolen again on February 8th, 1981, recovered 4 days later in Huntington Beach, California. Governor Bruce King arranged for the Baca County Sheriff Big Jim McBride to fly to Los Angeles to retrieve the marker. Chamber officials, along with Jarvis Garrett, officially reset the tombstone in iron shackles at Billy's feet on May 30th, 1981. And here he was known by many names: William Henry McCarthy, William H. Bonney, but he was best known as Billy the Kid. Born in New York City in 1859, he would find infamy in the Old West as a hired gun, outlaw, and otherwise stone-cold killer. His mother died in 1874 when he was 14, leaving Billy to spend the next year in foster homes. In 1875, he was caught stealing clothing from a Chinese laundry. McCarthy fled town and began his career as a roving ranch hand, gambler, and gang member. Billy first earned his reputation as a gunslinger in 1878 when he participated in a bloody frontier war in Lincoln County, New Mexico. He joined a vigilante group called the Regulators and was charged with the murder of Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady. Pursued by Sheriff Pat Garrett, the Kid sought refuge with friends in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. On the night of July 14, 1881, Garrett went to the home of rancher Peter Maxwell to question him about Billy's whereabouts. No sooner he had woken Maxwell, the Kid was also approached the house suspicious of one of Garrett's deputies on the porch. The Kid backed into Maxwell's darkened room, shouting, "Who is that?" Recognizing the Kid's voice, Garrett drew his gun and fired off 2 rounds. One bullet struck the 24-year-old near his heart, killing him instantly. Well, they've locked this thing down pretty tight here. No one's going to be stealing this again, but this is where the Kid is. We're standing right next to him. There are 3 graves here. Tom O'Fullard and Charlie Bowdry. But this one on the right is the Kid. I did find out later, if you see my other video on Dave's Market in town, that this isn't really his gravesite. The gravesite was washed away by a flood, and this was the best estimate as to where he lies. So the chances of him being right under there are about 0. So it's close, but not exact. As for the Lincoln County Wars, a week from this coming Wednesday, I'll be going out and staying in Lincoln County for a week. And you can certainly expect another video. And there's other people buried here for sure. This is a cemetery, or Fort Sumner. This is the grave of a 2-year-old. Born Christian Palmer, born in 1900, died in 1902. That's pretty sad. These are information markers on the 2 men that were buried with Billy the Kid, friends of his. Lucian Maxwell. This is once the richest man in the country. Bought Fort Sumner. And his home was where Billy the Kid was staying when he was shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Peter Maxwell. And apparently Peter was the one that informed Garrett of where Billy was. Billy was dating his sister, and he did not like that. First wife of Pat Garrett. Wow, she only lived to be 19. Well, what we're looking at right here is, you look off in this direction. This is pretty close to where Fort Sumner was, and it's completely gone now. There's no remnants of it. But I want to talk for a minute. I'm going to read this about the history of the fort and what happened here. General James Carleton, commanding the military department of New Mexico, ordered the establishment of Fort Sumner in late 1862. Carleton and others mistakenly believed the Pecos River and the land surrounding Fort Sumner could support thousands of forcibly relocated Native Americans. And let me say this, the forced relocation of people in the history of this planet has never amounted to anything good. Between 1863 and 1866, the U.S. government forced approximately 500 Mescalero Apaches and 10,000 Navajos onto the Bosque Redondo Reservation. While imprisoned at Bosque Redondo, the Mescalero Apache and Navajo endured terrible hardships, including lack of clean drinking water, insufficient food, and inadequate shelters. These harsh conditions led to rampant disease and hundreds of deaths. Mescalero Apaches escaped from Bosque Redondo in November 1865, but the Navajos remained imprisoned at the Bosque Redondo until they signed the Treaty of 1868 and returned to their homeland. Following the disastrous failure of the U.S. government's Bosque Redondo experiment, the land set aside as reservation returned to the public domain. The Army sold the fort buildings and other improvements to the famous frontiersman, Lucien Maxwell. We saw his grave just a few minutes ago. In 1870, he moved his family into the former military force in 1871. Within a year, Fort Sumner had transformed into a small farm and ranch community consisting of about 200 people. And here in the bottom is a picture of Navajo prisoners at the Bosque Redondo Reservation. You know, it's pretty obvious that what our government did on this piece of land here was wrong. And what it makes me think about is what could be going on now that history will look back upon as something horrific, something terribly wrong. I imagine back when this was going on, the majority of Americans read the paper and supported what was being done here because they didn't get all the right information. The government was misinformed, probably. Certainly the people were. I think it's a pretty good idea for all of us to keep our eyes and ears open at all times. Well, I'm going to head back to camp. And I hope all of you have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for coming.